For those of you guys who thought I was going to give the answer to that, I'm not. But like I said, you should be able to use the code we did last week in order to write that next program up. So the next thing we're going to look at, we've looked at the different data types. We're going to look at the different types of mathematical operators we have as well. So we have the ones that you should all know already. Now that is addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Another two I'm going to show you if I use two asterisks or two times signs, that would actually calculate the power of. So for example, the power of 9 is 9 to the power of 2 is 81 if I wanted to calculate that. We can also use a double equals. Now if we were to use a simple equals, that would actually look to assign a variable. But the double equals would be where we're comparing two different sides of that symbol. And we will be using those later on in this lesson. Now, what I want you guys to do is I want you to think about how all of these will be used. I'm going to very quickly delete them because it may mess around with our code. So if I was to print and I was to say 5 times 2, that would actually return the number 10. It's recognized that this is not a string because it doesn't have the speech marks around it, so it's actually calculated that for me. If I was to do print and I was to use in speech marks 5 times 2, what that would do, what that would do is that would recognize 5 as a string, and so now if I was to run that would actually print 5 twice. Okay, there are different ways we can write this, and they would obviously all have different outputs or different outcomes. So if I was to write 5 times 2, what do you think that would print? Have a quick guess before we run this. Print Okay. I'll very quickly do a few additions as well. Okay, so these are different ways that we can write it. So obviously, when we run this, we can see the different outputs that we have. So we need to make sure that whenever we're writing any bit of math, that we write them correctly. Okay, now that one's actually thrown up an error because it's recognized 5 as a string. As it's recognized it as a string, it's recognized it as a piece of text, so it cannot add the number 2 to it. So there are a few examples of what we could do. As we can see, this one has recognized that all as a string. It's printed that. It's taken, again, 2 as a string, and it's printed it 5 times. And the 7 is quite straightforward. So bear that in mind. Make sure that you actually type your code correctly. Now, bearing that in mind, what I want you guys to do, again, is another quick task. I want you guys to get the user to enter a number. So we're going to use a variable. We're going to ensure we use the correct data type. We're going to input a number. And then what the program will do is it will actually print out the first 5 multiples of 5 of that number. So for example, if the user was to enter the number 1, it will then print 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If the user was to enter the number 2, it would return 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. If the user was to enter the number 10, it would return 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. I almost exposed my great math skills there. So what I want you guys to do is create that program for me. Ensure you have spaces between each of the responses. So you can do them on separate lines. Spaces between all of the multiples. You can do them on different lines, or you can have spaces in between. If you can do spaces in between, that will be even better. But if you cannot do that, if you're struggling with that, feel free to have them on separate lines. So you should, at this point, have 2 programs on this. You should have the program with the knock knock joke. and we should have the multiples program as well. So I'm going to let you guys do that. I want you guys then come back on to the next video.